Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the rules you've relied on for years, rules you believed were clear and unchanging, have just been rewritten overnight. That is exactly what has happened for gun owners across the country. The Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, has fundamentally altered how concealed carry is regulated, and this change could directly affect how you carry, where you can carry, and even the legal boundaries you may have unknowingly crossed. The stakes are real, immediate, and personal. Before we go further, I want to ask you this. How would you adjust your concealed carry practices if a single court ruling changed the legal landscape in your state tomorrow? Write your answer in the comments below. I want to hear how you would respond responsibly. Now, let's break down what actually happened. The Supreme Court ruling clarified the extent to which states can impose restrictions on concealed carry permits. Historically, concealed carry laws varied dramatically from state to state. Some states had may-issue policies, giving local authorities wide discretion in granting permits, while others operated on a shall-issue basis, requiring permits to be granted if basic criteria were met. In my legal analysis, the court's decision moves the country closer to a uniform interpretation of constitutional protections surrounding concealed carry, emphasizing that state restrictions must not infringe upon rights protected under the Second Amendment. This ruling does not exist in isolation. The Second Amendment, ratified in 1791, provides individuals the right to keep and bear arms. Courts have consistently examined this right through the lens of both personal protection and public safety. In prior landmark cases such as District of Columbia v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago, the court recognized an individual's right to possess firearms while still allowing for reasonable regulation. In this case, the 6-3 decision reaffirms the principle that while states can regulate for safety, they cannot impose arbitrary restrictions that undermine the constitutional guarantee to carry firearms for self-defense. Fourth and Fifth Amendment considerations are also relevant. Lawful concealed carriers are afforded protection from unlawful searches, seizures, and arbitrary revocation of rights. In my legal opinion, any attempt by a state to enforce overly restrictive permit laws without due process would likely face immediate scrutiny in federal courts. The ruling thus strengthens procedural safeguards, ensuring that gun owners retain both their rights and protections under the Constitution. Federal and state law intersections are particularly significant. In my analysis, while states retain the authority to regulate firearms within their borders, this Supreme Court decision places clear limits on how much discretion they can exercise in permitting concealed carry. States that have historically denied permits on a discretionary basis may need to revisit their policies or risk legal challenges. Courts would likely examine whether any continued restrictions align with constitutional standards set forth in this ruling. For gun owners, the practical consequences are immediate. Lawful concealed carriers must understand the new boundaries and ensure their actions remain compliant. In my legal opinion, updating your knowledge, verifying permit validity, and reviewing state-specific regulations are essential steps to avoid inadvertent violations. The ruling does not grant unrestricted carry. It clarifies constitutional limits on state interference while reinforcing the importance of responsible ownership. Political realities also shape the impact of this decision. Supporters argue that it protects law-abiding citizens and creates consistency nationwide. Critics warn that rapid legal shifts could cause confusion and complicate enforcement. In my opinion, both perspectives are valid, but ultimately, the ruling prioritizes constitutional fidelity over inconsistent state practices, signaling to lawmakers that any future legislation must withstand rigorous judicial review. Long-term implications are significant. The decision may prompt a wave of policy revisions across the country, clarifying where and how individuals may carry firearms. Courts will likely examine future disputes with heightened attention to constitutional guarantees, shaping concealed carry laws for years to come. In my view, this ruling is not the end of the conversation. It's a catalyst for informed, responsible dialogue between citizens, lawmakers, and the judiciary. Remember, the most important takeaway is that understanding the law is your best protection. Responsible, lawful gun ownership has never been more essential. Review your permits, stay informed, and consult qualified legal counsel when necessary. Now, let's dive deeper into what this ruling means on the ground for everyday concealed carriers. For decades, many states relied on a may-issue system, allowing local authorities to approve or deny permits based on subjective criteria. In my legal analysis, the Supreme Court's 6-3 decision directly challenges that discretionary approach. It emphasizes that the Constitution protects an individual's right to carry for self-defense, and that states cannot impose arbitrary or overly restrictive rules that effectively nullify this right. Consider a state like New York or California, which historically imposed rigorous permit standards, sometimes requiring applicants to prove a specific need. Under the new guidance, courts will likely scrutinize these policies more closely. This does not mean that states lose all regulatory power. They can still enforce safety measures such as background checks, training requirements, and age restrictions, but they must avoid policies that function as a de facto denial of the Second Amendment right. Historically, the balance between public safety and individual rights has been delicate. The court in Heller and McDonald acknowledged the necessity of regulation but drew a line where restrictions become unconstitutional. In my opinion, this latest decision reinforces that principle, signaling that state laws must be applied consistently and objectively without infringing on fundamental rights. Courts would likely examine whether discretionary denial practices meet constitutional standards or if they are unjustifiably limiting lawful self-defense. Real-world implications for gun owners are substantial. Suppose you live in a state with a previously restrictive concealed carry system. In that case, this ruling may open the door for broader access to permits, provided you meet standard requirements. For law-abiding citizens, understanding these changes is critical. It's not enough to own a firearm legally. You must ensure that your carrying practices align with both federal and state laws, as clarified by this ruling. The legal risks of non-compliance remain significant. Even with this ruling, carrying without a valid permit or ignoring state-specific regulations can result in criminal charges, fines, or license revocation. In my analysis, compliance is non-negotiable. Being informed is your best protection. This is why law-abiding gun owners should take proactive steps, review state statutes, stay updated on court interpretations, and consult legal experts when uncertain. Supporters of the ruling argue that it ensures equal protection for all citizens under the Second Amendment and removes unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles. Critics express concern over public safety, suggesting that broader access could increase risks if not accompanied by proper training and oversight. In my legal opinion, both sides raise valid points, but the court's decision prioritizes constitutional guarantees while leaving room for responsible regulation. The message is clear. Lawful ownership and constitutional fidelity can coexist with public safety measures. Looking ahead, states may need to revise permit applications, issuance criteria, and enforcement practices to align with the Supreme Court's interpretation. In my view, this is an opportunity for lawmakers to create transparent, objective policies that protect citizens' rights while maintaining safety standards. Courts will likely continue to play a critical role in ensuring that new regulations comply with constitutional principles. Remember, the key takeaway here is not just the headline, it's understanding how this ruling affects you personally. Every law-abiding gun owner should review their current permit, assess compliance with state rules, and be aware of any legal updates. Ignorance is never a defense, but being informed and responsible strengthens your rights and safety. Let's look at how this ruling will reshape concealed carry practices across the country. In my legal analysis, states with restrictive may-issue policies will likely have to rework their systems entirely. For example, New York, California, and New Jersey have historically required applicants to demonstrate proper cause before receiving a permit. With the Supreme Court's 6-3 ruling, courts would likely examine whether such subjective criteria are constitutional, potentially invalidating any policy that functions as an arbitrary barrier. This isn't just about permits. It's about the broader principle of equal access. Law-abiding citizens who previously faced bureaucratic obstacles may now have a clearer path to exercising their Second Amendment rights. Yet, states still retain authority to enforce standard safety measures. Thorough background checks, mandatory firearms training, and age restrictions are all constitutional under the court's guidance. In my legal opinion, the balance the court has struck emphasizes that regulations must be reasonable, transparent, and objective rather than capricious or punitive. One practical consequence for concealed carriers is understanding what counts as lawful carrying in your state. Even with more accessible permits, gun owners must be aware of prohibited locations, local restrictions, and transport rules. Ignorance of these rules can still result in fines, arrest, or permit revocation. There's a strong constitutional argument that while the court protects the right to carry, it does not eliminate all state authority. Compliance remains essential. This ruling will also likely prompt a wave of legal challenges and clarifications in lower courts. States may adjust their permit processes, and some may appeal certain provisions to see how far the court's reasoning extends. In my analysis, it's not a free pass, it's a recalibration. Responsible, law-abiding gun owners should stay vigilant, maintain records, and understand both state and federal laws. The real-world impact goes beyond law. This decision could change the culture around concealed carry, influencing training requirements, community safety discussions, and law enforcement practices. Courts would likely examine cases where state restrictions conflict with the court's interpretation, potentially setting new precedents for future legal arguments. At the same time, the political reality cannot be ignored. Lawmakers in restrictive states face pressure to comply with the court's ruling while addressing public safety concerns. Some may pursue narrowly tailored regulations that satisfy constitutional standards without undermining the court's intent. In my opinion, this creates a landscape where clear, objective, and uniform rules will likely replace subjective or arbitrary denial practices. For gun owners, the message is clear. Know your rights, follow the law meticulously, and be proactive in understanding changes. Consult legal experts if there's any doubt. Courts would likely support citizens who act responsibly, comply with regulations, and exercise their Second Amendment rights within the legal framework. Now think about this. If your state changes its concealed carry rules in response to this ruling, how would it affect your daily life and personal safety practices? I want you to answer this in the comments below. Let's start a discussion on how law-abiding citizens can adapt responsibly. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel for ongoing legal updates and analysis. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a video, and in the comments below, tell me what topic you want our next video to cover. Let's keep the discussion thoughtful, civil, and educational, because knowing your rights is only the first step. Applying them responsibly is what really matters. Remember, the law is complex, but staying informed gives you power. This Supreme Court decision changes the landscape, but how you respond, lawfully and responsibly, is what defines your safety, your rights, and your future.